Hi, I'm Parker Dahl,
And I'm Warren Eichhoff,
and welcome to So What?
a place where we ask the question that so many of our students are thinking about when it comes to historical events. So what?
Why do I need to know about the end of World War II? All of the good video games are set during the war.
The following are but some of the answers to those questions, and as always, you should make up your own opinions based on the facts.
Today, we will talk to you about the conclusion of World War II.
Specifically, the consequences of the war.
We left off last time with Europe appeasing Germany, and Hitler greatly expanding the German Empire. Actions that would ultimately lead to the beginning of World War II.
There are many, many resources out there that provide information about the war in extreme detail.
The History Channel is basically dedicated to it. So instead, we're going to focus on something that a lot of them leave out. What happened next?
In order to get there, we must first understand the context that the Second World War places the world in.
World War II brought about mass military mobilization.
There's an estimated 75 million people that die in the war, upwards of 100 million by some accounts, and roughly 20 million die in the Soviet Union alone.
Years of bombing raids leave basically every major European city merely a pile of rubble.
The firebombing of Dresden by the Western Allies that purposely targeted civilians resulted in 135,000 deaths.
The dropping of the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, killing an estimated 90,000 people and demonstrating a new level of destruction.
The dropping of the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki just a few days later, killing an estimated 80,000 people.
The Holocaust, which resulted in nearly 6 million Jews being killed in the most inhumane ways imaginable, starving prisoners put into gas chambers, killing tens of thousands each day.
This is all really heavy, and you absolutely should learn about it. There are people out there that have spent their lives studying these atrocities, and they have created resources and videos that are much higher quality than we could ever produce, and we'll link them in this week's lesson.
So, World War II has ended. The world is shocked by the utter devastation and brutality of it. And people are trying to figure out what comes next.
I say what, old boy?
Who you calling old?
Why are you focusing on the bad news? Here at the Ministry of Magic, we know that we have won. Toast your neighbors. Dispatch an owl to the Daily Prophet. If we hurry, we can get into the morning edition. We no longer need to live in fear of he who shall not be named. Our lives are perfect. Go back to business as usual.
You know, these two have a point. I wonder how someone at the time would have felt. So we should go back to a country that was heavily impacted but ultimately victorious. Let's go back to 1945, England. Hello, random English individual. Can you please tell me how you feel about the end of the Second World War?
Well, mate, I think it's quite great that we won. I mean, London is totally destroyed, as are most of the shipping lanes and the railroads. Most of them are now rubbish, and an entire generation has either been killed or crippled. The Soviet Union grabbed loads of land during our fight for survival, and the empire seems to be crumbling all around us. Blokes in Southeast Asia seem to be in revolution, as they probably ought to be at this point. And loads of people have been rationed to 1,000 calories a day. But you know what they say, stiff upper lip and all, keep calm, carry on. We won. Good on us.
Wow, that was a lot more than I was expecting. Have fun building your house. Is that wall crooked? As you can see, people had a lot of feelings. Not just in England, but in every European country, and largely most countries. Europe, which once considered itself the epitome of civilization, now laid in ruins.
One of the first things the Allies are going to try and do is denazify Germany. This process would strip all the supporters of the Nazi regime of the ability and power to regain control of Germany.
This plan was quickly and quietly abandoned, as it became very clear that if you banned all former Nazis from roles of authority, there would be nobody left to run the country of Germany.
There are forms of retribution taken against the Nazis. The most famous are the Nuremberg trials. that tried Nazi leaders that had survived the war. 12 of them are later sentenced to death for the crimes they committed throughout the war.
In France, quick trials resulted in the execution of over 10,000 Nazi collaborators.
In his For Freedom speech of January 1941, President Roosevelt talked of a new and more just world with freedom of speech, expression of religion, and the freedom from want and from fear.
This was the idea that created the League of Nations. It was agreed that, among many other things, it largely failed due to the United States failing to enter and banning the Soviet Union from ever entering.
Yeah, it takes nearly 20 years for the Soviet Union to enter the League of Nations. After World War II, a new organization is created trying to fix these problems. The United Nations, which has a Security Council with permanent members, the United States, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China.
The United Nations would start in 1945 with 51 member states, a place where strong bureaucratic language replaced the means of warfare.
Over the next decade, a process of decolonization will take place across the globe. It's important to note that this often was done against the wishes of the mother country. Great Britain, for instance, was forced to pull out of India after some successful mass protests. So in 1947, it left, and the countries of India and Pakistan were established. Burma, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia soon followed.
The Dutch conceded independence to Indonesia in 1949 after a violent conflict. The Europeans' African empire crumbled largely in the 1950s and early 1960s.
Wherever an empire broke up, new countries would emerge. The United Nations started with 51 member states and grew to 189 member states by the end of the century.
2 countries were able to rise from the rubble and continued to gain power: the United States and the Soviet Union. So great was their power that they were actually dubbed the world's first 2 superpowers.
Alliances start to form around these nations, each showing that they had unrivaled strength. The United States formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact.
On top of this, Stalin distrusted the capitalistic powers. He thought that they were going to try to overthrow his regime.
Western powers distrusted Stalin. Once Uncle Joe, now they thought he was going to try and use communism to destroy their countries.
This would ultimately lead to the Cold War, best understood by the process of trying to create and point the most nuclear weapons at one another. But more on this later.
So how should we remember World War II? It's often displayed as a war of good versus evil. The Nazis, no doubt, were evil. And the good guys, led by Captain America, of course, were successful. They had defeated them.
It's not as simple as that, and it's actually quite dangerous to think of it that way. For one, countries tried to falsely separate themselves from the Nazis. The Austrians claimed that they were Hitler's first victims, except most of them largely agreed with the Nazi occupation and actually fought with them.
Italians tried to separate from Mussolini and fascism, as if to remove it from their identity. It was a simple mistake, not worth mentioning.
The French actually ended up collaborating and supporting the Nazis during the Vichy government, going so far as to track and hunt down Jews within France and send them to concentration camps. This is something that the French government largely tries to ignore.
Then there are actions that people take. The good guys never make a decision that is bad. You can always count on Captain America to make the right call.
The Soviet Union was on the side of the Allies, but is Stalin really considered a good guy when his political purges were killing literally millions of his own people?
We still debate whether the firebombing of Dresden was necessary.
People also debate the necessity of dropping nuclear weapons on civilian populations.
This wasn't a simple war of good and evil. It was a complicated, dark war between people that made decisions that had far-reaching impacts.
It wasn't just the Allies that made these decisions. Nazis were people. Fathers, brothers, sons. They had hopes and dreams, and they made decisions every day. Decisions to put people in gas chambers. 6 million decisions to commit genocide.
It's important to recognize this, because while it is terrifying to recognize the potential destruction and depravity that humanity possesses, there's also so much hope.
While people can make decisions that have disastrous consequences, they can also make decisions to stop such actions, decisions to create, enlighten, learn. So, the question is, what will you decide?
Maybe instead of seeing the world as I wish it were, I should make an effort to make it that way. Because simply ignoring problem doesn't mean they're going to go away. And repeating falsehoods doesn't make them true. Oh, it's crooked. Everything's crooked. It's crooked. Hey, thanks again for watching. Go ahead and like the video, send a comment down below. If you have any questions, concerns, you know how to contact us. And, as always, have a great week. We'll see you next time.